I'd just gotten back from a week-long trip to visit my cousin in Bend. Nothing fancy, just some fresh air and a change of scenery. I hadn't even taken my coat off yet when I saw them 4 suitcases lined up neatly on the sidewalk in front of my house. My suitcases. Damp from the rain the night before, they looked like forgotten luggage at a bus station. My heart sank. For a second, I thought maybe there'd been some mistake. I stood there blinking, trying to make sense of it, like my eyes were lying to me. Then I saw the note folded and tucked into the handle of the largest suitcase. The handwriting was familiar, sharp, quick strokes I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists stuck to the fridge. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. It read, "If you still want to stay here, we've cleared the garage for you. Your loving daughter-in-law." That last part hit me like a punch. Loving. I must have stood there for a full minute, just staring at those words, hoping they'd rearrange themselves into something kinder, something that made more sense. But they didn't. The cab driver was still unloading my last bag when I pulled out my phone and called the bank. My voice was calm, but my hands were shaking. I asked if my mortgage payment had gone through. I already knew the answer, I just needed to hear it out loud. "Yes, Mrs. Carter," the woman said politely. "Your automatic payment of $1.867 went through last Friday." I thanked her and hung up, the silence around me suddenly deafening. I looked up at the house, the one my husband Richard and I had built when Ethan was just a toddler. Every brick, every flower in the yard had some piece of my life in it. Birthday parties, scraped knees, the smell of pancakes on Saturday mornings. And now my daughter-in-law had assigned me to the garage like I was a guest who'd overstayed their welcome. The garage door was unlocked. I dragged my heaviest suitcase over the threshold and stepped inside. It smelled faintly of motor oil and the kind of dust that settles when something's been forgotten. Against the back wall sat a twin mattress, thin and low to the floor, dressed in a faded floral sheet, and a single pillow that looked like it had lost the will to fluff. Next to it was a small nightstand with a mismatched lamp, nothing I recognized, and beside that, a portable clothing rack sagging under the weight of my coats and a few dresses. My books, photos, and keepsakes were shoved into cardboard boxes labelled in block letters, "Mom Stuff." Vanessa's handwriting again, neat and indifferent. I sat down on the edge of the mattress, feeling the cold concrete through the soles of my shoes. Through a tiny window above the water heater, I could barely make out the silhouette of the house. My house. The one I made a home. And here I was, boxed up and tucked away like seasonal decorations. My phone buzzed. It was Ethan. The message read, "Mom, we need the space. Vanessa's been asking for a home office for months. The garage has everything you need. Don't make this difficult." I stared at the screen, reading those last 5 words over and over. Don't make this difficult. As if I were the problem. As if I hadn't spent the last several years bending over backwards for them, signing over the house to them 2 years ago when they were new parents, taking on the mortgage payments quietly so they could catch their breath financially. I thought I was helping. I thought they'd be grateful. But instead, I was just in the way. I remembered all the nights I'd spent worrying about Ethan's asthma, the times I skipped lunch, so there'd be enough for him, the hours I worked after Richard's stroke to keep everything going. I thought of the holidays I cooked for the babysitting, the bills I covered without ever being asked. And now this. A mattress in a garage, and a text that told me not to be difficult. I didn't reply. I didn't cry either, not then. I just sat there staring at those boxes marked Mom Stuff. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly profoundly small. But something in me refused to stay there. Not in that garage, not in that silence. I didn't know what came next, but I knew I couldn't accept this, not after everything. I stood up, my knees stiff, and walked back toward the door. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew one thing: I was done being boxed away. I don't even remember deciding to call Judy. I just remember sitting there on that cold mattress, looking around at my life stuffed into boxes and reaching for my phone like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to the world. Judy Bennett and I had been friends for over 30 years. We met when our boys were in kindergarten, back when life felt simpler and full of possibility. She was the one who came over with soup when Richard got laid off, the one who helped me pack when Ethan left for college, the one who held my hand through the funeral. She answered on the second ring. Helen. What's wrong? I didn't mean to cry. I really didn't. But the sound of her voice cracked something open inside me. They moved me into the garage, I whispered. There was silence, and then the kind of quiet rage only true friends have when someone's been hurt. I'm coming to get you. 20 minutes. True to her word, she showed up in her old blue Subaru with a blanket folded on the seat and a thermos of coffee in the cup holder. She didn't pepper me with questions. She just opened her arms and let me cry, and then helped me carry the bags. Her house smelled like lemon and old wood, and when we walked in, her husband Jim just gave me a quiet nod and handed me a pillow like it was the most natural thing in the world. You stay as long as you need, Judy said as I sat at her kitchen table. Jim and I rattle around this house like two spoons in a drawer. You're not a burden. I tried to smile, but the shame in me was loud. I wrapped my hands around the mug she gave me and looked down at the steam curling off the coffee. This can't be permanent. I need to figure out what to do about the house. Judy didn't miss a beat. You mean your house, she said, sharp and certain, the one you're still paying for. I winced. I hadn't told anyone that part, not even Ethan. I didn't want them to feel bad. Or maybe I didn't want to admit how much I was doing behind the scenes. They needed help, I said. They had a baby. I thought if I gave them the house, signed it over, it'd give them some breathing room. They seemed so grateful at the time. Judy's eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. And they took advantage of that. Of you. There was something about the way she said it, no pity, just truth, that made it finally click. I'd been walking around trying to make excuses for their behavior, trying to explain it away as stress or youth or bad communication. But the truth was, I'd made it too easy for them to forget I was a person. I'd made it easy for them to push me aside. And now they were selling the house behind my back. The next morning, Judy made pancakes. I hadn't had pancakes in years. It was such a small gesture, but it landed deep. It reminded me I was still me, that I still mattered to someone. We were sitting at the table, the sun coming through the window, when she cleared her throat. There's something I need to tell you, Helen. I didn't want to upset you before, but you deserve to know. My stomach tensed. What is it? She hesitated. Last week at book club, Vanessa was there. She had a couple of glasses of wine and got a little too chatty. She mentioned she and Ethan are planning to put the house on the market. My mouth went dry. They're selling it. Judy nodded. Some new development, Oakwood Hills, I think. I stared at her, stunned. They were going to sell the house, my house, without telling me, without asking. The house where Ethan took his first steps, where Richard built his vegetable garden and took his last breath. It was like a second death, knowing they were willing to throw it all away like that. They think it's theirs, I said, barely above a whisper. Legally, maybe, Judy said gently, but morally that's another story. My throat burned. I didn't know what I was going to do, but one thing was becoming clear. I wasn't going to go down quietly. Not this time. Not for them. Judy didn't waste any time. That same afternoon, she called her nephew, Matt, and set up a meeting for me. He's a lawyer, she said, pouring me another cup of coffee. Deals with elder law, family disputes, all that. If there's any way to fight this, he'll know. I wasn't sure what I expected, some stuffy office with suits and marble floors, maybe. But Matt Wallace's office was nothing like that. He wore jeans and a button-down shirt, and his desk was covered in legal books, framed pictures of his golden retriever and a coffee mug that said, "World's okayest lawyer." But when he looked at me, it wasn't with condescension or pity. He listened, really listened, like every word I said mattered. I told him everything. How I signed over the title to Ethan and Vanessa 2 years ago because they were overwhelmed with their new baby. How I'd quietly kept paying the mortgage so they could get on their feet. How I'd come home to find my suitcases on the sidewalk and a note telling me I'd been moved to the garage. And how I'd just found out they planned to sell the house without even telling me. He didn't interrupt. Just sat back in his chair when I finished, exhaled slowly, and folded his hands on the desk. "So let me get this straight," he said. "You transferred the title of your home to your son and daughter-in-law, but you've continued making every mortgage payment for the past 2 years." I nodded. "Yes, every month, and they're living in the house rent-free and now planning to sell it while you're being relegated to the garage." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Yes," I said again, a little quieter this time. "I know it sounds ridiculous." He leaned forward. "Mrs. Carter, what you've just described may fall under what we call an equitable lien. Because you've made consistent financial contributions to a property you no longer legally own. You could potentially have a claim on it, especially if there was any verbal understanding or expectation between you and your son." I blinked. I wasn't trying to trap them or make it legal. I just thought I was helping. His voice stayed calm but firm. And they took advantage of that help. The law recognizes that even without a written agreement, consistent financial support in situations like this can entitle you to certain rights, especially when someone acts in bad faith. It felt strange hearing that bad faith, like it was something from a courtroom drama. But deep down, I knew he was right. I had acted out of love. They had acted out of convenience. For the first time since this whole thing began, I felt something in me shift. Not sadness, not fear. Something sharper. Fire. "What do I do now?" I asked. "Well," Matt said, leaning back in his chair, "before we file anything, I recommend giving them one last chance to make this right. If they refuse, then we proceed with formal action. But at least you'll know you tried." Judy was waiting for me outside the office, sipping an iced tea in her car with the windows down. I told her everything Matt said. She didn't look surprised, just proud. "You're not crazy, Helen," she said. "You've been too kind. And now it's time to stand up." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the guest room at Judy's, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead, wondering how it had come to this. I had raised Ethan with love and patience. I had stayed by Richard's side through every hardship. I never thought I'd end up here fighting for a roof over my own head, fighting for the right to be seen, to be respected. The next morning, I got a call from the mortgage department at the bank. A man named Trevor Phillips was on the line. "Mrs. Carter," he said kindly, "we've reviewed your payment history. You've made 26 consistent payments on this mortgage. I understand you've recently cancelled your automatic payment, is that correct?" "Yes," I said, trying to steady my voice. "That's correct." He paused. "You may have more leverage here than you realize. I'd like to invite you to come into the branch to discuss some options." I agreed, and 2 hours later I was sitting across from Trevor, a clean-cut man, about Ethan's age, kind face, no judgment in his eyes. He explained the concept of the equitable lien, again how I could potentially block the sale of the house until I was compensated or the lien was resolved. "They wouldn't be able to sell without your involvement," he said gently. It was the first time in weeks that I felt like I had control again. Then he added, "Your son called us earlier this morning. He seemed flustered. It's clear he didn't understand how mortgage law works or what missing payments can do to his credit." I let out a small, bitter laugh. He's always had someone to handle things first, his dad, then me. Now it's Vanessa. My phone buzzed then, like clockwork. "A message from Ethan Mom. We need to talk about the mortgage. ASAP. Please." Trevor looked at me waiting. "So, what would you like to do, Mrs. Carter?" It was such a simple question, but I hadn't been asked what I wanted in so long. I thought about the note, the cold mattress, the garage full of boxes labelled mom stuff. And I thought of Richard, how he would have hated this. "I want what's rightfully mine," I said. My voice didn't shake. Trevor smiled, not out of sympathy but respect. The next day, I stood on the front porch of the house I used to call home. I'd walked up those steps 1,000 times before, arms full of groceries, Ethan asleep on my shoulder, or just tired from work. But this time felt different. My hands were sweaty, my heart racing, but I kept my chin up. I wasn't here to plead or ask for favors. I was here because I had something to say, and for once I was going to say it. Vanessa answered the door, eyebrows raised. "Oh, Audrey," she said, that sugary voice of hers, trying to sound pleasant. She always called me Audrey when she wanted to sound polite but distant. "We weren't expecting you." I didn't smile. "I need to speak with Ethan." She hesitated for a second, then stepped aside. "Come in." The house felt colder than I remembered. It wasn't the temperature, it was the energy. My reading chair was gone. The framed photos of Richard that used to sit on the mantel had been replaced with sleek, abstract art that didn't mean anything to me. I stood there for a moment, letting it wash over me, this space that had once held love and family, now stripped down to something impersonal. Ethan came in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Mum, what are you doing here? I didn't waste time," Judy told me. "You're selling the house." He froze, glanced toward Vanessa, then back at me. That flicker of guilt passed over his face, just long enough to tell me everything I needed to know. "We were going to tell you," he said. "Once things were finalized. Finalized. Like my memories didn't matter. Like everything I'd built here could be wrapped up in a real estate listing." I took a deep breath. "I've stopped paying the mortgage." That got his attention. His whole face changed, calm confidence melting into panic. What I cancelled the automatic payments, I said again, steady. If you want to sell this house, you'll need to start making the payments yourselves. Vanessa stepped in, voice raised. You can't just do that. What about our credit? We have plans, Helen. We've already put an offer on a house in Oakwood Hills. I looked her right in the eye. Then I hope you have a backup plan, because this one just got a lot more complicated. Ethan tried to regain control of the conversation, but his voice had lost its calm. Mum, come on. This house was Dad's gift to us. You know that. It was never really yours. Those 5 words hit me like a slap. Never really yours. After all the years of working to pay that mortgage. After Richard and I built this place from nothing. After birthday parties and Christmases and late-night talks in the kitchen. All of it erased just like that. I stared at him, letting the silence do the talking. Then I said, well, I suppose there's nothing more to discuss. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. Your father would be ashamed of you, Ethan, and for the first time in my life, so am I. I walked out into the spring air, the sun warming my face, my steps slow but solid. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. Back at Judy's, I told them everything. Matt shook his head in disbelief. Judy poured me a glass of wine and just looked at me with this fierce, proud smile. You finally stood up for yourself, she said. Took long enough. Matt leaned in his tone more serious. It's a strong start, but we'll need to back it up. I'll contact the bank, explain the situation, and see what kind of lien we can place on the property. In the meantime, gather all your records, bank statements, checks, anything that proves your payments. I nodded. I had everything. Richard had always taught me to keep receipts, to keep track. And what about my things still in the house? I asked. Judy gave me a wry smile. We'll go get them. And if they try anything funny, I still have my softball bat from our league days. For the first time in weeks, I laughed. Not a small chuckle, a real belly-deep laugh that made me feel human again. Something had changed. I wasn't begging anymore. I wasn't boxed up in a garage. I was standing up, and I wasn't done yet. Matt worked fast. Within 2 days, he had drawn up a formal offer neatly typed and bound with copies of my payment history attached. This isn't just a piece of paper, he said, sliding it across the table to me. It's your voice in writing. You're offering to resume the mortgage payments, but only if they agree to sell the house back to you, not to strangers. I stared at it for a long moment. It felt strange seeing it all spelled out so official, so clear. I had spent so many years making quiet sacrifices, helping behind the scenes, never asking for anything in return. Now I was asking. No demanding. And it felt right. The meeting was set for the following afternoon at Matt's office. I didn't sleep much the night before. I kept going over everything in my head, wondering if I was being too harsh, if I should give them more time, more chances. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered the note. The mattress in the garage, my belongings labelled mom stuff, and that one text, don't make this difficult. It wasn't a mistake. That was how they saw me. A problem to be managed, not a person to be respected. I got to Matt's office early, clutching my purse tighter than usual. When Ethan and Vanessa walked in at exactly 2:00, they looked like they were heading to a closing. Vanessa was in heels, her hair styled like she was going on a listing appointment. Ethan wore a blazer, trying to look like the man in charge. Matt greeted them calmly and gestured to the chairs across from me. "Thank you both for coming. Mrs. Carter has considered your request and has prepared a formal response." He slid the folder across the table. Ethan opened it and started reading. I watched his face shift curiosity to confusion to anger. "What is this?" he asked. His tone was already rising. "This," I said, keeping my voice steady as my offer. "I'll resume the mortgage payments, but the house will be sold to me, not to a developer, not to anyone else, to me." Vanessa reached for the papers, her mouth tightening. "You want us to sell you the house for the remaining mortgage balance?" "It's worth at least 3 times that," I nodded. "And I've paid for it piece by piece for the last 35 years. I'm not asking for a discount. I'm asking for what's fair, for what's already mine in every way that matters." Ethan stood up, his voice sharp. "You can't do this. We have an offer on Oakwood Hills. We need the proceeds from this sale." Matt cut in smoothly, hands folded on the desk. "With the lien in place, you won't be able to sell until the matter is resolved. You're welcome to contest it, but I should warn you it will be lengthy, expensive, and public. In the meantime, that buyer in Oakwood Hills isn't going to wait forever." They asked to step outside to discuss. I sat quietly, staring down at my hands, trying to stop them from shaking. I didn't know what they were saying out there, but part of me didn't care. I'd finally drawn a line. When they came back in, Ethan's face was tight jaw clenched. "We'll accept your offer," he said, like he was swallowing something bitter. "But just know, you've chosen the house over your family." I met his eyes, unblinking. "No," I said. "I chose not to be erased. And with that, the house was mine again. Not just on paper, in truth." I walked out of that office feeling like I had just reclaimed a part of myself I didn't even know I'd lost. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't running on guilt or obligation or fear. I was standing on something solid, my own voice, my own choice. And as the door closed behind me, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the moment I took it back. The first night back in the house, I couldn't sleep. Everything felt familiar, but unfamiliar, like walking into a memory that didn't quite fit anymore. I wandered from room to room, touching the walls, the door frames, the banister on the stairs where we'd marked Ethan's height each year with a pencil. So many layers of life had been lived here, laughter echoing down the hallway, the quiet hum of the dishwasher, while Richard and I slow danced barefoot in the kitchen after dinner. The furniture had changed. Vanessa had painted everything grey and replaced our old oak cabinets with sleek white ones that looked more like a showroom than a home. But the bones of the house were still here. The creaky step on the landing, the way sunlight streamed through the bay window in the afternoons, the slight dip in the hallway floor where Richard had once tripped and laughed until he cried. I felt him everywhere. It had been 3 months since that final meeting at Matt's office. The legal transfer was done. Ethan and Vanessa had moved out quietly, bitter and silent. They didn't leave a forwarding address, but that was fine. I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. Tired, but free. I unpacked the boxes I'd stored at Judy's placing books on shelves and family photos back on the mantel. Richard with his fishing hat. Ethan as a boy with chocolate on his face. A wedding photo that had started to fade at the corners. I didn't have the money to undo all of Vanessa's design choices, but I didn't need to. I added warmth where I could soft throw pillows in sunny yellows, fresh herbs growing on the windowsill, the smell of lemon-scented cleaner and fresh-baked bread in the air again. Slowly, it started to feel like mine again. One morning, as I was arranging tulips in the vase by the front door, Richard always planted them in the fall, I heard the doorbell. I opened it to find Ethan standing there awkward and unsure, holding a paper bag that smelled like cinnamon pastries. "The flowers look nice," he said, nodding toward the fence where the tulips were blooming. "Richard planted those every year," I said softly. It was his favorite thing. Ethan nodded, shifting from foot to foot. "We didn't get the house in Oakwood Hills," he said. "Our credit took too big a hit." I didn't say anything right away. I just looked at him waiting. "Vanessa's pregnant again," he added. "Due in January." "Congratulations," I said, and I meant it, though the words felt heavy. He looked up, his voice low. "Emma misses you. She doesn't understand why we don't come around anymore." I felt a tight ache in my chest. "She's always welcome here," I said. He hesitated, then added, "So are we, if that's okay." I didn't answer right away, because forgiveness isn't simple. It's not the same as forgetting. But I didn't close the door either. I left it open just a little. In the weeks that followed, I settled into a rhythm that was both old and new. The house was quieter, yes, but it wasn't empty. I was rebuilding something, not just a home, but a life. One where I wasn't invisible. One where I chose what stayed and what didn't. And for the first time in a very long while, I felt at peace. Working at Rosie's cafe wasn't glamorous, but it gave me something I hadn't realized. I was missing a sense of purpose that was mine alone. I hadn't waited tables since college, and at first I fumbled more than I'd like to admit. My feet ached, my back complained, and remembering who wanted cream and who preferred their coffee black was its own kind of challenge. But each shift got a little easier. And every dollar I earned, every tip folded into my apron pocket, felt like a quiet declaration. I'm still here. I still matter. The regulars started learning my name. They asked about the tulips blooming by my fence, complimented the lemon bars I sometimes brought in from home, and treated me like someone worth knowing. Not someone who was aging out of usefulness, but someone with stories, someone with life still left to live. In the afternoons, I came home to my house, my home, and kept adding back the pieces of myself. I didn't have the budget to remodel, but that didn't stop me. I hung wind chimes on the porch again, the kind Richard loved. I tacked up family photos in places Vanessa had once declared too cluttered. I brought Richard's fishing rods out of storage and hung them in the den just the way he used to like they were trophies. The space began to reflect who I was, not the woman shoved into a garage, not the mother forgotten when she became inconvenient, but Helen Carter, someone who had built a life full of love and strength, and wasn't done yet. One Saturday evening, Judy and Jim came over for dinner. I made pot roast, just like old times, and Matt from the law office brought a bottle of wine, and his girlfriend, Rosa, who'd become one of my favourite people at the cafe. We sat outside under the old string lights Richard had installed years ago. The bulbs flickered a little now, but they still gave off that warm glow that made everything feel like a summer evening, no matter the season. The yard was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the kind of easy conversation that makes you forget time. At one point, Rosa handed me a plate of lemon bars and said, "This place feels like you again." I smiled and said, "It is me." Finally. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were drying in the rack, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The breeze rustled the tulips, and I could hear the faint creak of the old porch swing. I thought about everything I had lost Richard the early years with Ethan, all the time I'd spent giving myself away bit by bit. But more than that, I thought about what I had reclaimed: my voice, my home, my dignity, and slowly my sense of joy. I didn't choose a house over my family. I chose me, the version of me they'd stopped seeing, the one who had poured everything she had into raising others, and finally realized she was allowed to pour something back into herself. If you've ever felt invisible, erased, too old, or too late to start again, let me tell you something: you're not. You are never too small to take your life back. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is say enough. Enough to being overlooked. Enough to being silenced. Enough to being boxed away in a garage while the life you built is stripped down and sold off. That rainy morning on the sidewalk, staring at my suitcases, I thought I'd lost everything. But the truth is, that was the beginning. And now, standing in the home I rebuilt piece by piece, with laughter in the walls and peace in the corners, I know exactly who I am. My name is Helen Carter, and this time I'm not going anywhere. At its heart, Helen Carter's story is a reminder that no matter our age, we are never too late, too far gone, or too small to reclaim our worth. Life often asks us to give to our children, our spouses, our families, and many of us do it without hesitation. But somewhere along the way, it's easy to forget that we matter too. Helen's journey shows us the quiet strength in drawing a line, the bravery in saying enough, and the healing that comes from choosing yourself even when others don't. This isn't just a story about a house. It's about dignity, self-respect, and the courage to stand tall again after being pushed aside. For anyone who's ever felt invisible, discarded, or overlooked, this story speaks to the powerful truth that your value doesn't disappear just because someone else fails to see it. You have a right to be heard, to be safe, and to live with joy and pride. And sometimes the most life-giving act we can make is simply to take our place back at the table, not with bitterness, but with quiet confidence. If this story moved you or reminded you of your own journey, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What kind of stories or topics would you like to see next? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a future episode filled with heart healing and hope. Wishing you peace, strength, and the gentle reminder that you are never alone and never too late to begin again.